This is Marco Reus.
This is Shinji Kagawa.
This is Nuri Shahin.
Hello, this is Jadon Sancho.
And you're listening to the Yellowwall podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 461 of the Yellowwallpod. I'm Joshua from Butzko, and today we will talk about Borussia Dortmund's win in Champions League Group F ahead of teams like Newcastle, Milan and PSG, a loss in the Bundesliga against Leipzig, and we will preview Saturday's match against FC Augsburg. For all that and more, joins me Lars Pollmann. Hello Lars, how are you doing?
Hello Stefan, I am doing fine. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing very well myself. I'm already in the Christmas spirit. Are you yourself?
Terribly so, Stefan.
So we're supposed to have a little company Christmas party Zoom call thingy at some point, and because I'm in such a jolly mood, I put on my wife's Dortmund Christmas sweater, which is probably like 2 sizes too small. And I'm looking like the proverbial Presswurst. But it's still nice and cozy, and I thought since there is something from a Dortmund perspective to celebrate, i.e. the group win of the Champions League, why not carry that spirit over? But yeah, anyhow, this is a podcast, no one can see me, so that is a very good thing. But last, what people did see is Dortmund top Group F, the proverbial group of death, which was already a success when Dortmund wrapped up the round of 16, but now with a 1-1 draw against PSG last night, they indeed made it so that they will top the group, and we of course can talk about the pot 2 teams in a second, but I asked you the last time, I'll ask you again. First of all, what does it mean for Dortmund to top this group? Question mark.
Bit more money, I suppose. Quite a bit of prestige, because obviously this being the only group consisting only of teams out of the supposed top 5 leagues in Europe. There was a lot of focus on this group, as you said, the moniker group of death being thrown around at the time of the draw. So for Dortmund, who definitely weren't anyone's favorite, I would say, especially outside of Germany, to top this group, and at the end of the day, reasonably comfortably, given that PSG were quite happy to play out the game as they did at the end when they learned of the result in Newcastle. Yeah, it's a solid achievement for Dortmund. I think it's the correct order of teams at the end. I think Dortmund on the whole, outside of the meeting with Paris in France, were probably the best side in the group from what I've seen. Certainly the most clinical in terms of finishing their chances, especially at Newcastle and in Milan. I think PSG definitely were the best side Dortmund faced in the Champions League this season so far, so they deserve probably to go through. Obviously, they had quite a bit of luck with that terrible penalty call against Newcastle. Otherwise, they would have been out of the competition, unless Dortmund, having in that case already won the group, might have thrown in the towel a bit on Wednesday evening, played a bit more of a B team, as it were. So, apples and pears, or what's the saying in English? Ultimately, a solid achievement for Dortmund. Definitely a lot of reasonably favorable draws in offering for the round of 16. But also, I would say that they would do well not to dwell too much on their solid performances in the Champions League. I think there's always a bit of a pitfall, especially for a side like Dortmund, who are struggling domestically to hide behind their Champions League prowess this season, because they won't play in the Champions League until the end of February. So until then, a lot of Bundesliga games to be played, and I don't think that on match day, let's say 18, at the end of January, anybody can really say, hey, look, we advanced in the Champions League.
No, absolutely. I mean, things that are uttered from Dortmund are not aging well currently. Famously, Hans-Joachim Watzke said that the General Assembly, I think it was, or what the members' assembly or whatever, that people herald RB Leipzig so much, but de facto they are out of the cup while we're still in the cup, and we are also ahead of them in the table. Fast forward a couple weeks, and Dortmund no longer are any of those things. So yeah, I think you're correct with Dortmund not should not put too much praise on themselves for this, considering the general state of things. But that all being said, I still think this is a massive achievement, and it personally makes me very happy to see Dortmund perform well in the Champions League, because recent campaigns before, especially under Marco Rose, I thought it was really disappointing, and it's good to see Dortmund do well in the Champions League. Also good to see they played with a much better spirit yesterday against PSG, probably also knowing that they would fall on the somewhat soft cushion of already being qualified, even if you lose the group. But at least there was a bit more spirit going forward and a bit more attacking flair than when you compare it to how Dortmund set up away from home in Paris, where it was the chicken shit football we saw against Stuttgart and Leverkusen, for example, which was not very successful. So at least these are positives that we can take away from it. So obviously pot 2 are 3 teams from Italy, and then 3 other teams. We have Porto, we have PSV, and we have Copenhagen. And of course Inter, Lazio, and Napoli, that are the potential opponents in the round of 16. Lars, any favorites you personally have, or teams you bitterly want to avoid, obviously outside of Inter, which is logical since you are an Inter fan as well?
I mean, even if I wasn't, I think Inter clearly the best side of those. I think you can make a reasonable argument that given league form this season, the best teams in Europe have been Leverkusen and Inter, possibly with Real Madrid thrown in there. So avoiding them for any group winner would be important. I don't necessarily want to face Napoli just because there's a lot of individual quality in the team, even though I don't necessarily rate their coaching retreat in Walter Mazzarri. All the other ones, honestly, I think Dortmund can reasonably be expected to do well against. Lazio playing a terrible season in Serie A this season. PSV, Peter Bosch, I mean, they are on an incredible run of form if memory serves. So we basically know how they are likely to set up, and I think there's presumably, I don't want to sound like I watch PSV religiously, but I would presume that might be some tactical naivete that a side much more experienced in Europe like Dortmund should be able to make something out of in a knockout round. So I think they would be all right. And also, nice and close, good stadium. I don't know about the fans necessarily, but no travel stress as opposed to, for example, going to Porto, who ran Barcelona very close. If it was on goal difference, they'd actually won the group, but Barcelona won the head-to-head against Porto. And obviously, I think Copenhagen is the worst of the second place teams in all the groups. They only had 8 points, alongside PSG, actually. But yeah, I mean, Dortmund played Copenhagen last season.
Mixed results.
Yeah, but ultimately enough to eliminate them, I suppose. And from what I gather, of Copenhagen's games against Bayern. I think that's a decent side, as any side you will face in a round of 16 in the Champions League, but nothing to be scared of necessarily. So I really think outside of Inter and maybe Napoli, those are all teams Dortmund can reasonably be expected to beat in a round of 16.
Yeah, we'll know by Monday, because it's the date of the draw, who we will face. But yeah, I think to reiterate, because you just sort of said it in the context of PSV being naive, if there's one big credit to Dortmund's Champions League campaign so far, is that they've shown incredible maturity and real Champions League expertise, I would say, considering the experience in the squad. This is somewhat warranted, I would say, but nevertheless, it's good to see, because I will never forget the first year of returning to the Champions League under Jürgen Klopp, and how terribly naive Dortmund were in this group. And yeah, it felt a little bit unlucky. I feel like maybe Newcastle went through the same, even though they didn't play hardly as well as Dortmund did in these games, despite Dortmund not making it out of this group. But yeah, still, it is good to see, just in general, that Dortmund at least have the Champions League pedigree necessary to withstand such a draw, which of course is good to know, and hopefully it carries over into seasons to come, should Dortmund qualify for the Champions League again. But obviously, we should point out this was the last group match of that Champions League contest as we know it, because there will be a new modus introduced next year, which we can talk about soon enough. But the top two nations in the UEFA rankings will get a fifth Champions League spot, and Borussia Dortmund are working very hard of securing that one in both sides of the way you can interpret it. Because Lars, I don't know if there are things you want to discuss about the PSG game itself, but if not, we can already move on to the Bundesliga, because Dortmund are in dire straits there.
I think people probably expect us to talk at least a little bit about Niklas Süle and the monster tackle, or however it's called, whereas I'm going to be the grumpy old man and say that he doesn't deserve all the praise entirely, because the chance only fell to Kylian Mbappe because Süle made a positioning mistake and kind of underjumped the ball. So ultimately, if he didn't make that save, the goal would go down to, in my opinion at least, an individual error by Süle. So me being a grumpy old man will say that it's better for him to have rectified his mistake, obviously. But at the end of the day, it is one of those spectacular ones that you will remember. For example, like the Subotic one in the Champions League final against Bayern, the Bender save, was it in the cup against Bayern?
Yes.
De Ligt had one for Bayern last season, if memory serves. So I think these center backs or defensive players, even though Süle scores somewhat regularly, this is kind of their time to shine, and I think it's kind of cool to see how much recognition Süle has gotten for that, because obviously he's not been playing too much this season. There are rumors out there that he's quite unhappy with his playing time. Meetings with his agent and sporting director Sebastian Kehl. Obviously, he's not going to be sold or anything, but still, I wouldn't be surprised if he was unhappy, because quite frankly, you don't come from Bayern to Dortmund and expect to sit on the bench most of the time. So for him to have that moment in the spotlight is kind of cool.
Yeah, I thought Süle in general played relatively well yesterday, and yeah, no one is going to be picked ahead of Mats Hummels in the current form he is in. So it's really between Süle and Schlotterbeck for the other center back slot, and I want to say Schlotterbeck hasn't been doing too well recently, so yeah, there may be some change on that position should Süle be fully fit and ready to go, be warranted. But yeah, if we talk about this game, no Emre Can, of course, because he picked up the suspension very late. I'm not entirely sure for what it was, but I assume that was sort of a professional book me, so I'm missing that game instead of the other game thing. So understandable with Özcan then paired next to Julian Brandt in central midfield. I personally, I don't know how you saw it last, but I very much like this move now. The only tweak we need is for Julian Brandt and also Özcan and most of the other players to really cut out some technical errors and some really poorly placed passes that open up Dortmund counterattacks. But that being said, overall, I'm liking this move by Terzic to put Julian Brandt in that central position, and overall, I would say it worked quite decently. What did you make of Dortmund's overall performance, given that there are a few injury worries in that team currently?
I mean, I think we need to take those into account. I don't know how much credit I want to give Terzic for playing Brandt in central midfield, because quite frankly, whom else was he going to pick? I mean, Sabitzer came back from an injury, wasn't available for more than 45 minutes. Jan was suspended, Metscher is injured. So, I mean, who else is going to play in central midfield other than Brandt, who's done that on occasion this season, done well on occasion this season. So, I think they might have found a different solution if this had been an away game and Dortmund had to play for a draw, for example. Obviously, they kind of played for a draw on Wednesday, but they had a more attacking mindset, which was a welcome change after the last few games, where the criticism, rightfully so, was on Dortmund's chicken shit attitude, as you put it.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I was pleasantly surprised about the lack of rotation. Obviously, one can always make the argument that qualifying is more important than position you qualify in, so maybe this would have been an opportunity, but then again, it's only 180 minutes of football left, so this might not have been necessarily the point in time where you rotate too much.
I don't know. I feel like qualifying first, especially knowing which teams are in pot 1 and which teams will be in pot 2, because you had the general gist of things. I think it was pretty important to top the group and not lose this game, because making the quarterfinal versus ending your Champions League campaign in the round of 16, I think makes a big financial difference, and of course, as you said, prestige. And just overall, there are not many other fun things left in this season, because I'd be very surprised if Dortmund somehow re-enter this title race in the Bundesliga. And obviously the cup season is over, so the Champions League is pretty much the only fun thing left, unless you consider the race for the top 4 spots ginormous fun. So from that perspective, I think putting the focus a little bit on the Champions League is probably the right approach.
And ultimately, I don't know how much of that they did and how much it was just, lack of viable alternatives. I mean, Sebastian Aller was not going to start out of the blue ahead of Füllkrug. Moukoko isn't available. The winger situation, they've kind of switched things around there. I think Bynoe-Gittens has warranted staying in the first 11, and I presume he's going to stay in there for the next 2 games as well. But then obviously he had a very quiet game, so Malen came on, did reasonably well. Adeyemi did well for the most part. I think he still had those flopping issues, which are kind of getting on my nerves, because you could actually tell after half an hour yesterday, the referee from Sweden, I think, he just had enough of Adeyemi being on the ground after every duel, and he didn't get the call when he was fouled. Bit of the same for Füllkrug, who also spends an inordinate amount of time on the ground for a fairly tall, bulky striker. He doesn't get...
Shout out to Glenn Nyberg, or whatever his name is, because I thought he had a very good refereeing performance. I don't know if you agree,
for
but...
the most part. I think there was one...
Looking at Champions League standards, there was definitely one big foul right at the edge of the box. Yeah. I don't know, was it on Malen or so?
Füllkrug, that's the one.
Füllkrug, yeah. That certainly was missed, but knowing the Champions League standards that have been set by other referees, I thought it was a pretty decent refereeing performance.
Yeah, I would agree. Also, obviously, the offside goal that Mbappe scored, that is so close to call. I think that's fair enough that the linesman doesn't see that right away. And I think we have semi-automatic offsides in the Champions League, and that also, I think it was reasonably quick. It could be quicker, the VAR call, but then it was also fairly close call to make. So,
especially in the Champions League with so much money on the line, I actually appreciate this technology quite a lot. And taking a goal away from Kylian Mbappe, who I still don't like after, I know he was very young, but the way he celebrated when he was still playing for Monaco, it still does not sit well for me, and I'm a little bit petty about it. Sue me. So yeah, I was just personally glad for him that this one didn't count.
Fair enough.
It's football, man. It's just a sport. You can be a fan and you can have weird dislikes and don't need to justify them. Full stop. But yeah. It's funny looking at how Dortmund played in the Bundesliga recently and how they played against PSG. On the one hand, you can say very encouraging, but and you wonder how Dortmund didn't score more goals, but you can also say the same thing for PSG. So, how finishing luck sometimes, or first touch luck, Marco Reus, sometimes works. This could have been a 3-0 win for PSG or the other way around. So I'm not entirely sure what to make of this performance, but maybe with the result, it does feel decent. Had it gone differently, maybe not. I don't know, but yeah, it should be good enough to beat the remaining 3 teams in the Bundesliga, even though it's different competition and you obviously play differently. All this yada yada, and I also don't think if it's 1-1 at the end in Augsburg that neither Dortmund nor Augsburg would just basically shake hands and agree on a truce. These things wouldn't happen in the Bundesliga. But yeah, I think overall we can just be happy that there's one ray of light in a very mediocre Bundesliga campaign so far, which has been going in entirely the different direction. And I don't know if you listened to last week's episode, but Matthias very clearly said that for him the era of Edin Terzic is over. Lars, especially after what I call chicken shit football, I think for Matthias the point has come where he has no longer backs the coach. I'm similarly aligned just because I don't see the long-term future with Terzic, just because of the sporting development under him. I'm not really feeling things are going great, and I also not have the feeling that he's going to turn things around to the standard where they need to be at. Lars, but since we discussed it last week, I'd be remiss to ask what your opinion is on Terzic's job. Obviously he should keep it probably even until the rest of the season if there are no better alternatives, but I feel like a cut needs to be made.
I mean, whenever we are talking about coaching situations, the question has to be asked, what is the alternative? Obviously that changes whether you're looking at it during a season or in the summer. So would I sack him right now? Which, I mean, we've talked quite often that's just not going to happen. I think if he were to lose, in air quotations, his job, it would probably be more of a mutual understanding that it would be in the best interest of all parties involved for him to step down or move into a different role again or whatever. But yeah, at the end of the season, I could certainly make the argument that it would be the best for Dortmund, because ultimately I don't think he's good enough of a coach for this team right now. I think he can be a good enough coach for another group or set of players, who maybe need less guidance tactically in their development as players, and more of a shoulder to cry on, a motivating figure, someone who will fight for his team in the media and in front of the fans and all that. I think we mustn't forget the many qualities that Terzic has shown. I think especially the second half of last season obviously shows that he knows what he's doing to an extent. Otherwise, you don't go on a run like that. That's not just something that, you know, players do by themselves just because they get into a groove or whatever. There's certainly something to be said about the coaching job then.
I think the positives about Terzic is that he has often managed to turn things around that were not going great and managed to have the correct conclusions from periods that are not going great. Sometimes he was sort of forced to do things due to injuries and things sorted themselves out on a personal front. But I would give him the credit to say that he has managed to learn and react quite well to periods that weren't going well. But that being said, the fact that we're playing this poorly currently after the way the last season ended, I think is a massive step backwards that feels a bit like a fumble, that feels very needlessly. I don't know how you see it, but it's obviously there's again the unlucky circumstance that Sebastian Aller is not in peak condition. I think we saw last season what difference it makes if he is playing, because it affects Adeyemi, Malen, etc. in a very positive light. To have Sebastian Aller playing, so that would already be the number one issue I would sort of flag. But apart from that, just tactically, I'm not feeling the correct position of play, the correct spacing, or all these little things that determine wins and losses quite often. I'm not seeing what I need to see from this Dortmund team in a much bigger picture than just personnel wise. So from that standpoint, I'm having my doubts about his long-term future, and which is why I would hope that Dortmund can find a better coach going forward. But let's talk a little bit about the last match day, because Dortmund wanted to show a reaction, as it were, after Leverkusen and Stuttgart games did not go well for many reasons, mostly because the way Dortmund played was just entirely cowardly and unacceptable. Now, against Leipzig, I don't know if it's get out of jail free card for Terzic or Dortmund that Hummels did get sent off, but at least the first 10 minutes were promising until Özcan played a catastrophic pass and Dortmund got counterattacked. And maybe a little bit unlucky that Thomas Meunier deflected the ball the way he did deflect it. But nevertheless, Hummels then conceding the red card felt very needlessly, because you obviously want to give the striker the chance, Openda in this part, to still stumble the chance away, and maybe Kobel can save it too, as he's done in a different situation in that game. But last, obviously, that red card felt like it did decide the game quite early, even though after the 90 minutes, you can say that Dortmund definitely had chances to come away with at least a point. So, what do you make of this Leipzig game in general? Just talk me through it a little.
I think it's hard to argue the red card being the decisive turning point, because until then, Dortmund were better or started well into the game. I think they kind of showed us that they wanted, to show a reaction to, as you said, the piss poor performances against Leverkusen, especially Stuttgart, because that was a knockout game, and for you to advance in a knockout round, you kind of have to win that game, and there was no indication that Dortmund had any plan as to how to manage that. And I think the same criticism can be leveled at them after the start against Leipzig, and then Mats Hummels, as he sometimes does, makes an error in judgment. I think, as you said, just let Openda make a mistake, or let Kobel save the one-on-one, which he does quite regularly, or let him save the penalty, as in, make sure the foul is in the box. Because Kobel has just saved 2 penalties in the last few games, so he's in a good run of form there.
It's crazy, right? It's another element that I'm not used to as a Dortmund fan.
and obviously, quite frankly, the fact that Hummels has been suspended for only 1 game basically confirms that a lot of people inside the German FA are not in agreement that situation should have been corrected, as it were, by VAR, because I still haven't seen anything to suggest that definitely was outside, and hence not a penalty and a yellow, but a free kick and a red card. It's also quite interesting that the same player can make the same sort of foul in 2 games this season and it be judged differently, because Hummels also had a foul against Hoffenheim, which started outside the box, finished inside the box. And then they said the second contact is relevant, and now Hummels had a foul against Openda where he touched him more than once, apparently once inside the box, but this time they say the first contact is relevant. So, as I said, given that he's only been suspended for 1 game, that kind of says it all. Probably shouldn't have gone to VAR. Dortmund should have finished the game, or at least continued the game with 11, obviously. You can't just assume that everything else would have stayed the same. So I think a lot of people have pondered the question, would you rather be a goal down or a man down? And I think that early in the game, the answer is quite obviously be a goal down.
Yeah.
Especially when it's Hummels, your best central defender. Dortmund obviously had to make a change then. I think it was Bynoe-Gittens coming off for Süle, which I didn't necessarily agree with, because when you're a man down, you obviously have to play on the counter, and then Bynoe-Gittens was the only really quick player on the pitch for them, because they started neither Mal nor Adeyemi, if memory serves. So,
well, who would you have taken out?
Reus.
The options were Reus, okay.
Maybe even Füllkrug, because you're not, obviously you want to score goals and whatever, and Füllkrug is good in hold up and all that stuff, but they're not peppering him with crosses as it is from possession, and obviously a man down against Leipzig, they weren't going to dominate on the ball or anything. So I think you could have made the argument that Füllkrug was somewhat surplus to requirements in that game, but at the end of the day, they took off Bynoe-Gittens, and to Dortmund's credit, as you said, they had enough chances at the end of the game to make it 3-3, which would have been a great boost for morale, and also taking 2 points away from Leipzig, who, by the way, I thought were quite poor.
Yeah.
All things considered. They had so many potential counter-attacking situations that they squandered. I think they were sloppy in possession, allowed more chances against 10 Dortmund players than many other sides have done against 11 in the last few weeks. So I think at the end of the day, it's almost a lost opportunity for Dortmund, as weird as that sounds, when you're a man down after, 15 minutes or so, just because Leipzig were quite poor and Dortmund had, those couple of chances where if things go a bit differently, and if probably you're in a better frame of mind after the last few games, that would have gone in. I think if the same exact stuff would have happened in the Champions League this season, Dortmund would probably have found an equalizer, just because that's how football or sports in general sometimes work. Whether we call that momentum or whatever, I think Dortmund just don't have that special something in the Bundesliga right now, and that's why they lose such a game, which even down a man after a quarter of an hour or whatever wasn't, necessarily a loss, just because of how poorly Leipzig did with their numerical advantage. Yeah,
I think the most positive part really is like the last 10 minutes or so of the game, just when of course eventually Füllkrug scored, but just I think overall the the spirit from Dortmund shown to really go for it, and there were some positive substitutions by Terzic to bring on Reina, Malen, Adeyemi, not say try to I don't know, sit on the 2-2 draw after halftime or so. Obviously not in that chronological order, but you know what I'm saying is that overall Dortmund try to go for it, not in any limitations or so, and then really pressure Leipzig and put them on their heels. It was good to see, something we don't see often enough this season, and to sort of then combine the might of the Westfalenstadion with a team showing the absolute urge and will to win and nearly pull off the draw. I think was pretty great. Obviously, very disappointing that Yusuf Poulsen scored in the 91st minute the way he did, and Nico Schlotterbeck, I think, needs to do much better there than to be fooled by one shimmy. That I think is also disgusting and unacceptable for a player that I expect him to be. So he needs to do much better there. And also, I think tweeted that this was a fun game. Dortmund nearly got a point despite them punching themselves in the dick over and over again, because it's basically what they did. I mean, Bensebaini scoring an own goal. How fucking dumb is that? So a lot of things that really do irk me about this game, and I think the overall takeaway is that Dortmund are lucky that Leipzig are shit, because they do not look like a well-coached team, and I think reinforces at least my impression that Marco Rose probably is not the world beater coach, and I'm at least in that department glad that we're past him, because Leipzig, I think, with the players they have, should be doing a much better job than they are currently doing, and that they basically needed this game to squeak by Dortmund in the table to be in 4th place is also an indictment on them, and that gives me hope for the future that Dortmund can reel them back in and overtake them going forward, because let's face it, they should be better but currently aren't. Maybe they will solve their problems somehow too, but I don't know, I'm currently not seeing it. Long story short is it's a very vexing result. Dortmund arguably should have won this game minus the Mats Hummels decision, but to just put the blame at Mats Hummels' feet is a little bit too easy, because Dortmund had several other occasions where they tripped up over themselves, that is, and very vexing. One last point, I thought that Thomas Meunier, his first start in the year, if I recall correctly, had a relatively decent game, and I personally am okay with him playing out the end of the year, because I mean, we've harped on him a lot, but I still think he's a okay to decent right back, even though he has been scapegoated quite a lot. I think he can still help Dortmund in many ways, so I'm hoping that he can find some form quickly, considering the relatively cold start due to the Riasson injury now, which of course is a shame that he'll be out for, I think, 8 weeks. It was the ETA with Dortmund players. You just never know what that will turn into. So yeah, that's sort of my last thought on that. I just hope that Dortmund can turn things around in the Bundesliga, because they now absolutely have to. Next up is Augsburg on Saturday afternoon. What are we to expect from this game? Is there going to be a Champions League hangover? Because Dortmund did exude a lot of energy in that game, and of course picked up a few injuries here and there as well.
I mean, they've left themselves such little margin for error that I would be surprised if they allowed themselves to have a hangover after the Champions League. But then again, Dortmund are known to throw in a negative surprise here and there, so I guess it wouldn't be absolutely shocking if they laid an egg.
Yeah, I was going to say, at least it wouldn't be a surprise.
Yeah. I honestly don't recall seeing much of Augsburg this season outside of maybe a couple of simulcasts here and there, but they've had a great run of results after switching head coaches from Enrico Maaßen to Jes Torup. who coached Copenhagen in the first game against Dortmund last season, if memory serves.
Yes.
And then was exonerated there as well. I think they had 3 wins, 3 draws from his first 6 games, and then last weekend they lost at Bremen, which, I mean, Bremen, not a great side this season, bit better at home, but nothing outrageous. So that kind of would suggest to me that it's still Augsburg, and whenever Dortmund face Augsburg, you expect them to win.
That is correct.
More often than not, that has worked over the last few games. We talked before we hit the record button about the 3-0 win at Augsburg late last season when all was well and they overtook Bayern in the Bundesliga table. I don't actually know what happened after that, Stefan.
No idea. Nothing.
Suddenly the new season started and some of the players were gone. Whatever. So, I mean, honestly, I don't know how much time we need to spend on previewing a game against Augsburg, because ultimately it's only going to be about what Dortmund do, and if they get it up, as it were, for such a game, they should not have too many issues, even though obviously we know from experience that Dortmund sometimes have problems with these smaller, as it were, sides.
Well, Tobias Escher recently tweeted when Dortmund were playing the likes of Leverkusen and Stuttgart that if you have this low block type of style and you're basically trying to just to defend against good teams, that you shouldn't be surprised that when you face poorer opposition that you are lacking the wherewithal to break down low blocks yourself. I feel like this game especially could be such a game where Dortmund then struggle. Obviously, I really would hope that Dortmund for once cannot concede a set piece goal. That would personally make me happy a lot. And what I would like to see is obviously dominance for 90 minutes and really showing what they show in the Champions League sometimes, just the maturity to control the pace of the game, that you don't have to play full throttle basically for 90 minutes, because that's unrealistic considering the schedule and the time of the year, but at least to maybe score an early goal here and there and then control the game. This is sort of what I'm looking for. I don't need Dortmund currently to play exuberant, dazzling football, because it's unrealistic to expect that, but at least to control the match, to not make silly errors and not give away the ball completely unnecessarily with poor technical mistakes and all this, which of course might also be a sign of fatigue. I'm not entirely sure why Julian Brandt's individual form has dropped off so much recently, but those are certainly my thoughts when it comes to the midfield. I would like to see a similar starting 11 as we've seen against PSG, where I assume that Thomas Meunier will then again replace Marius Wolf on the right side, because Meunier was ineligible to play in the Champions League. So there's that. I don't have any further thoughts on the Augsburg game. Lars, if you have any last closing words for this show, be my guest.
Only to remind you, because you didn't mention him there, that Hummels is suspended for this game.
Yes, that is correct.
So the back four kind of selects itself outside of the Wolf-Meunier conundrum, which I have zero thoughts on.
Well, I mean, I don't know what the state of Bensebaini is, because he also got a knock, so it might be Meunier on the right and Wolf on the left. So yeah, with these warm words, I hope everyone out there has a great weekend. Lars, thank you very much for coming on, and we'll talk to you next time. Until then, goodbye.